he's his horse. And Alan Atchison is my special guest. He's the editor of Capstone Report, which is one of the most important places to go to get the news that everybody else is pretending is not going on, particularly if you want the dirty truth about the Southern Baptist Convention. That's pretty fair, right? So we have Alan Atchison here. He's been running the Capstone Report for a number of years, so he's really built up a strong base of support and quite a bank of work there. Thank you so much for joining me today, Alan.
Thanks for having me. A lot of news. 2020 has been loaded with news,
right?
And it just seems to not stop.
Right. And I think one of the things that we wanted to talk about today is the connection between what is happening in the election and this shock that people are going through right now in trying to process all the information, seeing trusted sources like Fox News, as well as trusted leaders like Chris Christie, et cetera, come out and do things that we never thought that they would do. On top of the fact that Southern Baptists have already dealt with the realization that in the Southern Baptist world, many of their trusted leaders do lie, cheat, and steal. Because that's basically what we're talking about here. We're talking about lying, we're talking about cheating, we're talking about stealing. And so what I want to talk to Alan about today is what dots can we connect between the SBC and lying and cheating and stealing as it goes on in the political world. Not only are there a lot of connections between individuals that we can talk about, but there's also just the larger cultural connection of the fact that we can't trust people that we thought that we could always trust. It's hard now to trust Christian organizations, political organizations, conservative organizations. So let me first start by asking Alan, okay, what his reaction is to the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commissions. If those of you who don't know, those of you who are Southern Baptist non-novitiates or whatever, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission is run by Russell Moore. It is the first place you start with when you're trying to get the dirty lowdown on what's going on in the SBC, because they always have their hands in everything. And the ERLC came out with a statement that said that there's no fraud, there's no evidence of fraud, and essentially saying that Donald Trump needs to stop trying to talk about fraud because that's dangerous for American democracy. What is your reaction to that, Alan, especially given that people have uncovered a lot of the links between the ERLC and some of these billionaires that are anti-Trump people?
Well, I think that's a great point. They came out very early on before there was a chance to really hear any evidence and said, there's no evidence, just give it up. And I think that was, it revealed their implicit bias. They were determined to put the story out that Biden won, it's over, that's it. Probably there's a little bit of sour grapes there. Russell Moore and his ilk are never Trumpers in 2016. I assume, we didn't hear otherwise this time, did we? So I assume he's still in that camp, very negative to Trump. So there's that statement was, I think, ignored a lot of questions. There were some evidence that lawyers were putting out, statistical analysis that was coming out very early on that raised questions. There were statements that were put in Trump court filings of affidavits. Now that's evidence. Now how good that evidence is remains to be seen. But to declare it no evidence of fraud or the like, I think shows more their narrative they were trying to advance than anything else. And if you've watched Southern Baptist Twitter and podcasts of the insiders and elites, they've been putting that story out. I think there was one professor from Southern today or yesterday on Twitter tweeting out a New York Times story talking about that. And I think that sort of is revealing where these insiders in the SBC are getting their information and news. I mean, they're reading the New York Times and deciding, well, there's no evidence. Well, yeah, that's a shock. The New York Times is like it makes Pravda look unbiased.
Right. Now, the funny thing about this is when we're talking about the ERLC, we're talking about Russell Moore, who came out against Donald Trump. But we're also talking about the people who are connected to him. There were people like Al Mohler who came out saying he was going to vote for Donald Trump in this some lukewarm display of support. But even a lot of those lukewarm supporters are now jumping on board with this idea that it's dangerous to democracy to question whether it's fraud. I don't even see why Southern Baptist leaders are opining about this. They're not lawyers. They're not politicians. They're supposed to be leading the church. I don't even know why they're talking about this, but they are talking about it. What do you make of the report that you published by Henry Anderson at the Enemies Within the Church about the connection between Russell Moore and the three billionaires, Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay, George Soros, the head of the Open Society Foundation, and then Paul Singer? Was that alarming? Are you leaning towards saying that ultimately there are financial motivations that are clouding people in the Southern Baptist Convention and maybe leading them to take this anti-Trump stance? What say you?
Well, there certainly is. We've seen the connection in that report, and we've seen the connection of money. The $100,000 came in to help fund the MLK 50 event, which was this huge event promoting essentially racial identity politics. That was put on by the Gospel Coalition and the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. So there's no doubt there is influence, whether it's rewards for putting out a message that these Democrat billionaires prefer, or if it's a sort of a quid pro quo. I think we have a little bit more digging to do, and we'll find, I think the truth will eventually come out on that. However, it should concern everyone when you're getting money from George Soros and his type of big progressive donors. They don't give money unless they're getting value for their money.
Right. And that's the thing that worries us. In some ways, what I'm going to say is this, is that the Southern Baptist Convention, those of us who are involved in it and have been fighting to try to restore the integrity to it, and we've been fighting the cheating, the lying, the stealing, all three are pretty rampant in the Southern Baptist Convention. We almost were inoculated to the election fiasco because we didn't have to make a big leap to believe that people in power would lie, cheat, and steal. We've seen it time and time again. And in fact, we have a history with our own presidents. We have J.D. Greer, the president of the SBC, who's not even supposed to be president. He canceled the elections that would have made it possible for him to be voted out of office. We have Albert Mohler, the president of the Southern Baptist Seminary, who said it was the wrath of God pouring out when there was the exposure of all the sex abuse scandals, but he himself was involved in the cover-up of what happened in Sovereign Grace Ministries and would not resign. We have Adam Greenway, the president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, who, long story, fired me, issued a press release lying about it, still hasn't taken that down. Then we have the president of the Southeastern Baptist Theological Society, who hires Karen Swallow Pryor and does this fancy dance about why he's hiring someone who has written so many things that are contrary, really, to the Southern Baptist ethos. What would you say is the single greatest factor in all of these failures of presidencies? Because we can go on about the missions boards and Lifeway, and it just goes on and on and on. Why in the Southern Baptist world, regardless of politics, because I know that Republicans can be just as dirty as anybody else, but why in the Southern Baptist world is it so common now that we have presidents of entities who are lying, cheating, or stealing? Where is the failure there?
Well, I think let's look at those. Let's look at in a good Southern Baptist fashion the three good examples really quickly. I think the example of Southwestern putting out that statement where they lied about you, which happily was exposed on the Eric Metaxas show for what it was, lies. They did it for their own political purpose. It wasn't national politics, but it was the inside. They were wanting to get rid of someone, and guess what? They hired more people right after that because they were rewarding those that are loyal to the SBC hierarchy, the insiders. There's the amicus brief that ERLC just filed again in the Will McRaney lawsuit, which they asserted a blatant falsehood. They put it in print that the Southern Baptist Convention, Convention of Independent Churches, is actually an organization where it has a hierarchy where the SBC is over everything else, which the SBC Constitution clearly contradicts. We have that local church autonomy. They've made the claim in that brief they filed with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that basically the Maryland-Delaware Convention is like a church, and the SBC's North American Mission Board is over that, and then that convention is over the 500 odd churches that are in that Maryland-Delaware area. So this is contradicted in the SBC Constitution. We put an article up the other day on that, and I think it shows just how far these people are willing to go to lie in order to accomplish their ends. And they wanted to pull the wool over the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals because most people don't come from a Southern Baptist church background. They don't understand churches are autonomous and completely independent. They're going to come from church traditions that are more top down, or at least have something where the denomination owns the property or has some sort of influence over the local churches. So that was, I think that's huge, a huge mistake to put that type of assertion in print.
Okay, now the Will McRaney web, just so you know, because I think a lot of people don't have any idea who Will McRaney is just yet. He was the director of the Maryland Southern Baptist Convention, right? There's a Southern Baptist Convention, and then there's, for each state has its own Southern Baptist Convention. And in the Maryland case, he was removed by Kevin Ezell. Is that correct?
Allegedly, based on the lawsuit.
Right.
And I've seen the emails. I've seen this evidence. People can go to Will McRaney's website. They can see Ezell's lies. You want to talk about lies? McRaney has it documented, and it should scare Ezell and everyone associated with North American Mission Board that they're going to face depositions, and they're going to be forced to answer really tough questions now that the Fifth Circuit has allowed the lawsuit to continue. It's going to go to discovery, so they should be worried about what's going to be found there.
Right, and a lot of what the lawsuits allege and a lot of the accusations against Kevin Ezell deal with mysterious things that have happened to the money, right? So now we're getting into those other things other than lying, the other two.
Well, they've used money. Apparently they've used money as a tool to influence. That sort of is how the game apparently is played in the Southern Baptist Convention. So McRaney's lawsuit basically boils down to Ezell using tithes and offerings to force him out because of the way that the partnerships work. North American Mission Board was helping fund some operations in Maryland, Delaware. See, it's sort of like in a sense, it kind of works like the federal government, where some states pay more into the fund than others, and others kind of take out more. Northern states, they don't have as many churches, they don't have as long a history, so there's not as big a donor base. So there is some sort of transfer to help missions efforts in these smaller, more northern states. And it's a good thing. However, these conventions have had enough of Ezell's top-down hierarchical type of demands. In fact, I think there was a letter recently, I forget how many state executive directors signed it, saying that they're basically done with their partnership with the Southern Baptist Convention's Ezell and folks, because they've just had enough. So there's a lot of power politics and money involved here.
Right, and I think a lot of what I noticed that is going on is you have the North American Mission Board, which funds church plants. And it's already been well documented that as we spend more on church plants, the more the Southern Baptist Convention is shrinking. Why is that happening? It's because you have people at the top who are being very political about how they do these church plants. They want to go for these very expensive, urban, woke church plants that don't have a lot of people, but once the church plant is there, they get to send messengers to the annual convention who vote on everything. They get to vote on who becomes the next president. Then of the SBC, the president then appoints all the committees, the resolutions committee, they appoint trustees, they appoint all these people. So it becomes this big cycle where once you have a group of people in power who have their levers placed at every turn of the wheel, you're locked in the way that right now Trump voters feel locked in, where they're going to the state legislatures. The Democrats are united against them. The GOP has enough people who have been bought off, who they're going to stab Trump supporters in the back. They take it to the courts smack it down. The media censors them. You feel like at every turn you're being suffocated, even though you know that something's wrong. That is the same setup that has gone on in the SBC. And I almost think that part of this tie that Alan was talking about between the leaders of certain SBC entities and the anti-Trump forces, part of the tie is just an affinity because they're so similar in their managerial styles, because they do lie, cheat, and steal. And that's how they remain in power. And that's how they do things. Now, let me just move to one issue, and we can get to some of the other things dealing with the Will McRaney lawsuit and all that. But I have a philosophical question for Alan. Do you think that with this groundswell and all this momentum among conservatives to take back the Republican Party, to take back the government, et cetera, are we going to see that energy in the Southern Baptist Convention? Because it's been years that good Southern Baptists have been frustrated about the fact that it never changes year after year. They can never get Russell Moore fired, no matter what. Albert Mohler has been president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary since the very early days of the Clinton administration. I mean, nothing seems to change. Are we going to see, do you think, at least psychologically, a change among Southern Baptists, where now that they've seen this play out with the Republican Party, they're going to want to take back their convention? What do you think?
Well, I think definitely in terms of, I think it started in Birmingham in 2019 at the annual meeting when Resolution 9 passed. If you remember that, it got almost the people out with pitchforks because the rank and file were angry. They understand maybe not the nuances of all the inside baseball stuff, but they sure understand racial identity politics is a horrible thing for the church. And Resolution 9 sort of embraced it. So I think we've been watching in the convention, there is a growing sort of a populist movement that's rebelling against these insiders, these elites, because they realize the elites are sort of running the SBC for other insiders instead of letting it accomplish its mission. That's much like I think the sort of the insiders of the Republican Party have been. It's been ignoring the needs of, say, working class people, small businesses for a long time, and focus more on the needs of the party insiders and the think tanks in DC. So I believe we're witnessing sort of a trend both in the GOP and in the SBC, but it takes these moments that galvanizes it. Mm-hmm. And in the SBC, I think the turning point was 2019 because, before that, people were aggravated with Russell Moore, but they were still wanting to give the benefit of the doubt to the SBC. That passage of Resolution 9 was the moment. Everybody understood it. That's why it was not long after that we saw the Conservative Baptist Network form. And that's the type of thing that you need to put together the ground game to win an SBC election. And I think if the SBC had been held in 2020 in Orlando, that we would have seen a real conservative elected president. I think in some ways.
Isn't it so bad that it's really too bad that that election was canceled? I mean, it's hard for people to believe this, but J.D. Greer, the president, literally canceled the election and just said, "Uh-oh, I'm just going to stay in for another year." And he totally played like the dumb jock kind of thing, like, "Oh, gee, I don't know. I guess I just have to stay here for another year because what else are we going to do? You know, like put an ad on like Craigslist to find another president or something." It's so crazy, the shenanigans that they've played. I do think that there is energy. I just think that there's a difference here because the Constitution of the United States was written by very intelligent founders, and there are things that we can do within the Constitution to fight back against the election fraud. We can do that, right? The SBC doesn't have that. We really are bound by rules that completely favor the people in power, because these trustee boards are appointed by the president, who's elected by the messengers, who come from churches that are planted by the mission boards, which are appointed by the president. So basically, it's a huge circle, and it's going to be hard to break out of that. I think that for the SBC to have a groundswell and to really fight against it, we have to be much more countercultural, or even we have to break the rules. We can't, like for instance, you've been to the SBC annual meetings. Those Robert Rules of Order are just, they're suffocating, and they managed to get everybody off the agenda. They call time. That's how they were able to sink some of the resolutions that I've put in there. And you're never able to confront people. We have a mutual friend who was thrown out by the Dallas police because he was asking questions of Russell Moore. Do you think that there really is a group of Southern Baptists that are really going to have that kind of guts to just be bad, to not be goody two-shoes, to break the rules?
Well, I think if people are convinced they're standing up and doing the right thing, yes. And that means, yes, they will do what's necessary to win an election. And that's everything in the SBC, as you sort of described, this Byzantine labyrinth of a committee on committee, then you get a committee on a nomination. So it's complicated. And it requires people to have the network in place, because as president, you're going to appoint, the committee on committees, and it will do the committee on nominations. So you don't really control the people who are going to do the nominating. So, so that means you have to have that network there that's going to put the right names, because I think you get 2 for each state, and they have to be the right people, or you're going to have bad nominees. So that's one of the reasons that Moeller and his network, we like to put up that graphic very often on stories that show all of the influential people that he kind of has mentored and built his own network. So to get the convention saved, you have to do the same type of building the base, much as if you were going to run for an elected public office. So I think the Conservative Baptist Network is well placed to do it. I don't know who is going to be nominated. I suspect there'll be 2 or 3 or 4 nominees perhaps coming in. There'll certainly be an establishment candidate. But I think they're going to be asked some tough questions about social justice. And with all of the stuff going on with the SBC entities, Lifeway, with that really it really was a scandalous severance package for its former CEO, and the big fight over that. You've got the North American Mission Board lawsuits. You've got the ERLC. There are going to be a lot of questions, and I think it's going to be hard for an establishment person to have the right answers. So it comes down to turnout. I think people are still going to be in 2021 annoyed about Resolution 9, and they're going to want to rescind that.
And just so you know, Resolution 9, for people who don't know what that was, this was a resolution that was originally drafted by someone in California who wanted to put in a resolution to denounce critical race theory. The resolutions committee that had been appointed by J.D. Greer took that resolution, they word crafted it and they turned it into an affirmation of critical race theory and intersectionality, which is just really a bridge too far. And they forced that on the whole convention. It was a sight to behold in 2019 because you saw the swamp in action. The resolutions committee, which is really secretive, they came out with their slate of resolutions. I had submitted a resolution against non-disclosure agreements. Remember, that was just scuttled off to the side and nary a word was said about it. But this resolution 9 was bundled in with a bunch of other resolutions. They had some time on the floor. I know that Tom Buck, if I'm not mistaken, stood up and tried to speak against resolution 9. But again, the procedural rules completely disfavor anyone who's trying to go against the slate that's presented by these official committees. It's almost impossible to go up against it. Everything in the SBC is anti-insurrectionary. You just can't rise up against the powers that be in there. Who would be at the top of your list, just to be a little bit more casual here? Let's have a little bit of fun here. Who's at the top of your list that you would want fired? I mean, I know who's I can start with mine, but who are the top people that you want to vote off the Southern Baptist Island?
Well, I think if you're going to restore order and restore trust and confidence, Russell Moore has to go. You can't have a lifelong Democrat running the ERLC. First and foremost, if you want to restore trust, you got to do that. I think Kevin Ezell has to go. He's aggravated other SBC insiders, these state convention executive directors. They signed that letter complaining about how things are going, and they threatened to reconsider their commitment about being involved in the SBC. So that's huge. So I think those two, you get those under control. I mean, there's some philosophical issues if you talk to people worried about the SBC's decline. You know, the lower baptisms, dwindling numbers. There's some really good arguments to make that church planning is not necessarily the best way to do it. That you need to have some evangelism money. They used to fund church evangelism efforts. When Ezell started the church planning stuff, I've been told by people that they really slashed and did away with apologetics ministry. I can't say enough about the importance of that, especially for reaching kids who go to college. They're going to have really tough questions, especially in today's environment. You need to give them the resources they need. So if we want to keep people in church, maybe that's one way we do it. So from a conceptual level, I think there's an approach. There's ethics issues there with the McRaney lawsuit and everything. So Ezell and Russell Moore have to go. But also, we've talked about church planting a couple of times, and you brought up something that was important. They want to plant woke churches. Well, this is something that we've written about, and I want to touch on that again, because they have this big $15 million project in Atlanta, kind of on the Beltline, in this small little town that's kind of gentrified, where they're building soccer fields, mixed retail, and a new sanctuary. I mean, it seems like a really odd thing to be doing in a community. They've got residents angry at them because they're gonna tear up houses and historic parts of town and trees and all that to do all of this. But it goes back to 2010 when Ed Stetzer pitched this new idea for the Southern Baptist Convention. They were seeing declines, and of course the statistics show that white evangelicals, millennials and Gen Xers might be kind of aging out of church and not returning as the way that they used to. So the solution was to plant churches that appealed to immigrants and other minority communities in big cities. That was their ticket to saving the SBC. So that's what they've done.
Doesn't this sound familiar? This sounds like exactly what happened in the 2020 election. I mean, it just sounds, with the only exception being that there really was no woke constituency in the SBC. When the final figures came from pollsters, it looks as though this goal of turning massive amounts of Southern Baptists away from Trump fell flat on its face, did it not?
I think the numbers show that
Yeah.
nobody listens to never Trumpers because everyone instinctively knows. You don't have to be a philosopher or theologian to know that Donald Trump is kind of mean. He's not. He says really rude things. Joe Biden wants to murder babies, and he thinks it's a great idea. I mean, it doesn't take much to kind of make that moral judgment that Trump is a far better vote for a Christian than any Democrat. Any Democrat.
And on top of it, Biden cheated. I mean, that's the leading hashtag on Twitter. He cheated and he lied and he stole the election. And for me, what I don't get is how Southern Baptists put up with lying, cheating, and stealing leaders for so long. Some of these people have been in their offices for almost 30 years, leading seminaries and leading these different mission boards, et cetera. And yet it took us watching it happen at the national level with an election to finally turn to our own denomination and say, we've got to clean this up. And I really hope that that energy spills over, that you're going to see that. I think that the goal of trying to plant churches that are ethnically sensitive or to speak directly to ethnic issues or to racial issues, I honestly think that needs to be set aside as a policy, because if you look at the way Trump made these inroads into the Asian American, Latino, and African American communities, he did it by not throwing identity politics at them. It was almost, we're at the point now where identity politics turns people off, first and foremost, the very minority groups you're trying to talk to. And I can say this because I belong to several of those minority groups, and you feel like you're being pandered to. I also kind of want to see, all right, show me the people in high positions that are actually from these groups that are going to be treated respectfully and not get mass purged like the way that Adam Greenway purged all the minorities from Southwestern with nobody objecting, in the whole SBC. I just think that what we've learned from election 2020 has to be applied to the SBC, even though you're going from politics to religion. Because if the goal is to try to stop the hemorrhaging and the reduction in numbers of Southern Baptists, I don't think going out and planting woke churches is going to work. That has all the same lack of appeal religiously that it had politically. And I don't think trying to speak to targeted messages based on people's ethnicity is going to work. Trump, I think, has finally overturned the wisdom in that.
I think he realized that the Republican Party was not reaching working class people, and that neither party is doing that now. So you can reach any ethnic group with a simple message that explains how your policies will help them, will benefit them. So I think in terms of churches, you have to focus on what your primary mission needs to be and trust that God is going to help you reach all the people in your community. You don't have to hire expensive consultants and become woke to do it. In fact, the research shows both there's a lot of secular and research that kind of shows this, as well as some religious studies. But if you start going liberal in politics, your church dies. Particularly the main lines died. Southern Baptists like to say they died because of theological liberalism, but that's only part of the story. The theological liberalism started in the 20s and 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s in the seminaries. But the exodus of mainlines did not start until the 70s. And why was that? It was the uniform opposition to the Vietnam War. So the theological liberalism sort of became political liberalism, and it clicked in people's minds finally. They're pushing their agenda, and it's not what I believe, and it gets people to ask deeper questions. So if you want to kill a denomination, go politically liberal.
Right. No, I agree. I think that it's just the wrong direction to go in. Now, you had a really generous list. You only had 2 people on your on your firing list. I could, number one, I think the seminaries, get rid of all of the presidents and all the provosts of the seminaries. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could finally wake up one day and be like, Albert Mohler is not the president of anything. I don't have to I don't have to see anybody forwarding his daily briefings. We don't have to have his proteges, doing damage control every 5 minutes, retweeting his daily briefing and saying, no, what Albert Mohler really meant was exactly what you wanted to hear. I can't wait until that day is gone where he's just not the president of Southern anymore. Get rid of Adam Greenway. I don't understand who thought that was a good idea. The man has zero charisma. He hasn't made a single decision that I can say makes sense. Everything he touches turns to garbage. I mean, he was the chairman of the board at Lifeway for 10 years, and they just shut 170 of their stores. And then he comes to Southwestern, has a huge financial crisis, dumps all of the good faculty, and then he says that there's a budget crisis, and then hires a bunch of replacements that are going to make it worse. Yeah,
that are all white males, right?
Yeah, that are all at the same time that he's going and giving speeches at Dwight McKissick's church. And has Dwight McKissick even been paying attention? Has he even commented at any point about the fact that there was a purge of all the racial minorities? But then the provosts too, get rid of, who's the guy at Southeastern who went toe to toe with Todd Starnes, and
he's no longer at the seminary.
What
My
happened?
understanding, he's not. He resigned as provost, and he's no longer at the seminary.
Oh wow! Well, but wouldn't it be?
I think it's an interesting story. I don't know though.
Wouldn't it be great though if we woke up one day and Matt Hall was gone and Randy Stinson was gone? That would just be so beautiful. Randy Stinson, the hatchet man, with hobbling around, firing somebody else this week. If he were just finally gone, that would be wonderful. I think that there is so much that could be done in the Southern Baptist Convention if we cleared it out. Now, I'm just going to wrap up with a discussion of history, because I know that you love history. Okay.
Yeah.
The Bolshevik Revolution. All right. How did it go wrong? I think we are at that moment in so many ways. The only exception is we weren't in a world war leading up to it. But anyways, we're right at that moment of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. My understanding of it is, Lenin, he sneaks back into Russia because the Germans want to get him there so that Russia will have a revolution and have to withdraw from the war where they were fighting against Germany. Lenin shows up, he's able to get this street revolution started, and then there's essentially a civil war. But the mistake that was made by the conservatives, by the White Russians, that's what they were called, was that they wanted to bring back the Tsar. They wanted to go back to the way things were before. And even though the people in Russia didn't really want Bolshevism, they didn't want to go back to the Tsar. And this is what concerns me, both with the Republican Party and with the Southern Baptist Convention, is the idea of, we can see the problems with the left. We can see that the left is dangerous. They're deranged. I have nothing good to say about them right now. But the question is, are we going to get it wrong if we position as the counter to that a return to this earlier form of government? And I know that Donald Trump says, make America great again, but I don't think that Donald Trump really meant, let's go back to the way it was under Ronald Reagan, when Ralph Reed and Orrin Hatch and these people were our moral lodestars. I think that he had a vision that it was going to be something new, a working class, populist Republican Party, which I love where that's going. In the Southern Baptist Convention, do you think that people really want to go back to the conservative resurgence? And is that the way to go? Or would that be somewhat like the mistake that they made in Russia when the Bolsheviks took over? What do you think?
Well, there's a lot of nostalgia for the conservative resurgence.
Right.
There's a lot of respect there. I do think the SBC needs to consider constitutional changes. They need to go to online voting. You don't need these big conventions. They need to be able to conduct business remotely. I mean, if we can vote for president by mail, why can't we have some similar type of online system where churches are able to vote. Right now, I think turnout usually at the convention, there's like about 50,000 churches. I think less than 10% bother to send messengers, and usually they only send one or two. They're usually entitled to 5 or 10. So I think some semblance of letting churches vote online with their total number of delegates or messengers, much like proxy stockholders do it. I mean, there's no need to have that. So I think constitutional changes, they need to make it more responsive. When there's a problem, you don't need to wait 5 or 7 years. Like, to get rid of Russell Moore, we have to have a president appoint, that whole thing to get a good trustee. And it could take 4 to 5 years to get a majority to get the guy out of there. You've got to come up with some way to make things, you want it stable. You don't want to just get rid of someone because he wrote an article that was controversial. But you do need to have something that more quickly responds to what the people in the pews think. I mean, don't we value what they think and say?
I guess my thing is, how do we get new voices in there, people that we haven't heard before? Because that is what I yearn for. I'll be honest about from my perspective. What would worry me is if our answer to the day after, let's say the day after Russell Moore and Al Mohler are gone, and now we have this beautiful, brave new world that we're going to be able to populate the way we want. Do we just want to put up there the famous people who have spoken at a million conferences but were conservative? Is that where we want to go? And I have confronted this a lot dealing with the LGBT issue, because I think that the old order when it came to LGBT was, yes, they stood very strong on biblical homosexuality, the biblical view on homosexuality, but the way that they dealt with it was to root out people who were caught engaging in homosexual acts and to expel them and to kind of erase them from the congregation. And I don't want to go back to that. I want to go to a point where we are strong and firm and we say, this is the biblical position on homosexuality. It's wrong. You can be restored. You can be brought back to God's vision of sexuality, and we're going to work with you and embrace you. We're not going to tell you that it's okay to do that, but we're not going to have this secret police going around digging up gossip on you to destroy your career. So that's just one little area where I feel uncomfortable with just going back to the way things were before, going back to the good old days. When, like I said, the days of Ralph Reed and was Ralph Reed a Southern Baptist? I don't even know if he was Southern Baptist, but the days of that earlier period. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I think that's a good. I think that's a good point. There has to be change. There has to be new voices. The problem has been the platforms are almost all now controlled by people who have ties to Mohler. If you want reform, we have to get some things done. When Russell Moore was hired to take over the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, he hired, I think, 8 new people to come on his staff. I think 4 or 6 of them were all connected to the Gospel Coalition. In fact, I think 3 of that number were not even Southern Baptists at the time they were hired. It was more important to be in the network, in the club, than Southern Baptist. This is a huge problem that you've got. And you're right. You don't just want to sweep out the old guys and replace it with another good old boy network. There needs to be something better. And I think that if the SBC invest the time, they've got good people. I think the Conservative Baptist Network people are pretty smart. I think they could lay out a reform package.
Yeah, it's good. That's good. I think one of the things that I hope to see in the future of the SBC is we've got to stop this reversal of or this distortion of influence, because the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission was supposed to be a way for Southern Baptists to voice their values to the world outside, to the political world. And instead, every single article that I've seen on the ERLC is always telling Southern Baptists what they should think about political issues. So it's become a portal by which the outside political world basically gets to come in like a kid going into a candy shop and picking up Southern Baptist supporters by changing what Southern Baptists believe about politics. And I don't know how to set the direction of influence back on the right course, where people who are in leadership positions are supposed to be servant leaders. That's the biblical basis for it. You know, you have to be a servant in order to lead people, right? So you're supposed to be servicing and nourishing the flock and representing their faith values and trying to fight for them against the forces in society that threaten them. But instead, it seems like the Southern Baptist congregation, the people in the pews, have become a resource that gets sold and traded by these leaders in these deals with outside political groups. And I don't know structurally how to change that because there's always going to be the risk, because it is such a large denomination, that we're a resource that's too politically valuable and too financially valuable to not become exploited at some point. You know, how do you reverse that so we're not being exploited, I guess?
Good personnel at the top. Someone who actually views that role as protecting the Southern Baptist Convention from bad political theology. Someone who's not a lifelong Democrat. That would be a good start. If you start, if personnel is policy, I've heard said over and over. So if you've got bad people running things, you're going to have this type of things happening. So you just want to have someone good at the top, and you can shrink the budget a little bit. Don't post as many things to the website. Be selective. There really are only a few issues that Southern Baptists really would speak monolithically about. And those will change from time to time as the political conversations change. But I think this idea of the ERLC, I remember when there were, it took them forever to kind of come up. California had a law, was it a year or two ago, where they were going to mandate that churches couldn't do certain things with, I think, the counseling or something.
Yes.
They were just silent for until the last minute.
I submitted a resolution in 2018 on that, basically saying that we should support counseling programs to help people who were dealing with unwanted homosexuality to try to restore them. And that was shut down. And the reason I was given from the Southern Baptist Resolutions Committee was that this is not something that they want to opine about. I mean, if you're the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, what the heck is there to opine about? Why are you talking to us about all of these other issues? The perfect example was the MLK 50 conference. Why did they have this huge conference, and why was Karen Swallow Pryor invited to speak at that? She's an 18th century British literature expert and a white woman, and it's like, why are we having these big events where they're opining on all these political issues and platforming all these people? It seems like for fame and self-promotion, instead of connecting with what the religious liberty challenges are for the Southern Baptists who are in the pews. And counseling is a perfect example. That the issue of counseling families or individuals who are struggling with homosexuality or transgenderism, that is every church in America practically is struggling with that. And the ERLC gave us no guidance. They published 1 million books, or not they, but people who were close to them published 1 million books about how to talk about on the LGBT issue with your congregation. But on the issue of what to counsel the individuals or the families about what to do, they never gave them clear guidance. And they never gave the churches support as they were fighting against the regulatory powers of the state. They were trying to impose that on them. I think that the failure to stand up for reparative therapy or all those kinds of counseling, that was the prelude to then their failure to stand up for the right of churches to open during the COVID crisis. And I think one thing led very clearly to the other, as far as I could tell.
Yeah, I think there is an interesting connection there. There's sort of, and the people they've promoted, you mentioned Karen Swallow Pryor. Well, she had a tweet just a couple of days ago, or maybe yesterday, in fact, where she basically compared abortion to people who refuse to wear masks. I mean, these type of the people are the ones being promoted, and there's a reason there. There's an agenda there. They want to change, and you mentioned this earlier, how people think about these issues. So they put people up there that aren't really the most trustworthy or the best. Southern Baptists don't listen to them. I mean, Russell Moore has been there, I forget how many years now. I mean,
7 years.
nobody cares. Nobody cares. He can be never Trump, but it raises the question, why do we still, I don't know, I think it's a $4 million budget. It seems like it's a waste of money. Hire more missionaries if you're going to get value for what you do. I mean, at least when Richard Land was there, I mean, he mirrored what Southern Baptists thought. I mean, was the ERLC great back then? I think it was demonstrably better.
Well, the thing about Russell Moore was that every time I almost have tuned out when people start saying we're finally going to get rid of Russell Moore, we're going to get all these churches to cut off their tithes. They always do that. You remember this in 2017, how there was this big movement against Russell Moore, and then at the last minute, everybody backed away, and I've seen that happen again and again. But like I said, I think 2020 hopefully is the game changer. What should I tell to the people who are in churches and who want to know, should I stay and fight or should we cut out of the SBC? Because I get that question at least twice a month from people I know who are struggling with this question in the SBC. I've been asked to speak before deacons and to present on this. I know that there are a lot of churches that are dealing with this very question of whether they should stay and fight or just go independent. What say you?
Well, I think that's a great question. I'm asked that too, and I'm not sure I'm always qualified to give the answer. Each person's position is different, and it's going to be for every congregation. But I think if you believe that the Southern Baptist Convention is a great missionary sending organization, there's a lot of resources, hundreds of millions of dollars of capital, of property, of things that are held in trust that your parents and grandparents and other Christians across the last last 150 years ish, something like that, what they've given. If you want to be a good steward of it, it's worth going to Nashville. It's worth making another stand. And if you can't get a conservative elected in Nashville in 2021, that's a great time to really reconsider. Because if with the level of anger and the level of concern, if you can't affect change and get a good president who is going to appoint trustees who do their job and hold Al Mohler and Russell Moore accountable, then there's going to be no saving the SBC if you don't get a good president. In fact, Mohler, we've talked about Mohler a couple of times. The video, the trustee who's been 6 years as trustee at Southern, he put a video out calling out Mohler out, but pointing out the critical race theory there, all of the problems, the non-disclosure agreements and how unbiblical it is, the way they're operating. And then he pointed out in this little tidbit that Al Mohler says one thing privately and then does another in public. I'm not sure that's the leadership that we really need in the SBC. It's
certainly not, and that's what we've gotten. I think because when you're in the swamp's position, let's put ourselves in their position. It's a very difficult situation to be in. You're basically using 15 million people for your own personal advancement or for whatever thing that you've convinced yourself is worth doing. But the swamp is always this tiny infinitesimal layer of people who are benefiting from it. And then this huge mass of people who just want to go and worship Christ. And they want to be part of a Bible believing, Christ driven community. And so in order to stay in that position, you're constantly having to talk out of both sides of your mouth. You have to, on some level, keep the 15 million people interested, right? You have to constantly draw in the Southern Baptist people who have this conservative worldview, who are going to be voting for Trump, and you have to convince them that you're fighting for their rights. But ultimately, you have to please the secular world. So what they usually come up with is some very deceitful sort of public campaign where they claim to be fighting for certain values, and then they're setting the stage for their own efforts to fail so that the secular people get exactly what they want. And that's what they've done over and over and over again. I'm finally seeing that fall apart in the political world, because I think that conservatives now have figured this out, particularly with the election. And speaking of that, and this is the last thing I'm going to ask you, do you think we are going to have our day in court after everything is done with this election, and it's either Joe Biden or Donald Trump, but whatever, we fought our good fight against election fraud? Are we going to have our day in court in the SBC where we can confront the SBC leaders who stood on the side of election fraud, who stood against honesty, who stood against the freedom and the sovereignty of the United States, and instead we're fighting against and denouncing efforts to hold election officials accountable and to uncover fraud? Are we going to have a moment where we get to confront them and we get to say, why did you make these damaging public statements and undermine the witness of Christ at such a crucial time? What do you think?
Well, I think Nashville, when there's question time, is going to be fun to watch, because I think they are going to be asked these types of questions. Why are you getting in publishing articles saying there's no evidence of election fraud? Are you an election attorney? Are you an expert at this? Have you looked at what the evidence and the things that Trump campaign claims they have? And whether you think the evidence is good or not, it's still evidence. Affidavits of witnesses, things, statistical experts, it's evidence. I'm not asking you to say that it's proof of fraud, but you can't say there's no evidence. There's evidence. And the fact that they just put that narrative out there shows there's either incompetence or they're doing something on purpose. And I think they're considering, much like the mainstream media, the errors always go in one direction, kind of in favor of progressives and the left. With the media, same with our ERLC. So I think the questions are going to be asked in Nashville, and I think it'll be a huge driving factor amongst conservatives, because if you can have sort of a theological and political incompetence guiding your public witness to the political world, I think you have to make a decision and say, I'm not sure I want to continue funding that. So Nashville, that's the key. If you want to save the SBC, you need to go, and you need to make plans to be there. I mean, it's centrally located. It won't be as pricey or as expensive as some of the other towns, Dallas, or if it's out in Anaheim some years. Those are pricey trips for a lot of people. So Nashville should be easily doable for most folks. And we need to find a way to get laymen involved. That's what drove the conservative resurgence. It was easy to the battle for the Bible. And you could get a busload of people from churches to ride together and go. What do we need to do to reach the rank and file? Because in most churches, the pastor and his wife maybe are the only ones who go as messengers. And that's only a fraction of the churches that do that. So we've got to get more people involved and who are willing to take a couple of days off of work and go. So I think that's one of the things we need to be working on and talking about between now and the summer when the convention rolls around.
Okay, yeah, I want to reiterate that and back up what Alan says. I also want to say that Alan's work can be found at capstonereport.com, correct?
Correct.
Right, capstonereport.com. You can go and find a lot of reports on what's going on in the Southern Baptist world. It's really interesting. These are very interesting times for the SBC, largest Protestant denomination in the country. And I would like to affirm what Alan just said. I think that Nashville 2021 will be a very key convention, because this is the first time we'll have met in 2 years since J.D. Greear canceled the last one. And this is the first time we're meeting after this train wreck of an election in 2020. So I think people should go, even if you're not a Southern Baptist, but you want to just be involved in trying to defend the various kingdom of Christ, the various places where the kingdom of Christ is advanced. I would just go to Nashville during the convention and report on what's going on. I think there's going to be a lot of events throughout the city. I assume that the Conservative Baptist Network and many other places are going to be having sideline church conferences and pastor conferences and meetings during all of it. I think it is a great time. I think that right now the Southern Baptist Convention is going to be more attuned than usual to populist resistance or populist anger, and they're going to have to respond to it. So that's a thing. If you want to go, if you're a Southern Baptist, I think you have to start looking around now. Try to find out how your church appoints messengers and try to get yourself selected to go. You may want to go to your deacons or go to your elders in your church and present to them the issues that are at stake, and try to make sure that you have the support of your church to go in and try to fight against these changes. And if, when you do that, you find out that your church is really happy about the Gospel Coalition and they love Russell Moore and they just think El Mohler couldn't do anything wrong, then you may want to try to find a new church. But that's, I'll leave it at that. Do you have anything else to add? And then we'll let everyone go to sleep because it's Saturday night.
Well, I was going to say, you've written a book or written a chapter in a new book on social justice or something, right?
Yes, I have. It's on the seminaries. Yeah,
Okay.
Because I say that the seminaries are basically where all of the corruption in the college world infects the churches. So, but
well,
yeah.
I'm looking forward to reading that. It's in my review pile of things to do,
Okay.
and so I think that touches really nicely talking about because you're right, postmodernism sort of, it infects undergraduates because it's taught in secular programs, and people who go to teach at seminaries, many of these people hold undergraduates or advanced degrees from secular institutions, and it kind of comes in through the back door, so to speak.
All right, well, thank you so much, Alan, and I'll hope to have you on again. I'm really enjoying these conversations with all these bright people now that we have the live stream stuff set up. So hopefully we'll have you on again. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.